Welcome back to the Rum Ration, the podcast where we dig into military history and explore the human aspects of warfare. I'm Rejoy Chatterjee.
And I'm Colin Robinson. And today, Rejoy, we are taking a deep dive into an early, often forgotten, but utterly fascinating chapter of the American Revolutionary War. This is episode 21, named Quebec 1775, America's Worst Winter Getaway. It's a story of ambition, hardship, and a campaign that really should serve as a cautionary tale of early American expansionism gone very, very wrong.
That's right, Colin. We're talking about the American invasion of Quebec in 1775-1776, a bold attempt by the Continental Congress to bring the French-speaking province into their budding union as the 15th colony. They could only dream about maybe looking for a 51st state someday. And I find it very interesting, given their experiences in coming up north like this, they still talk about the 51st state. I mean,
Yeah. It's not been a very successful track record.
Has not ever.
No. This is a real stinger, humdinger for them. Wait for it. And while it ultimately failed, it offers incredible insight into the raw realities of 18th century warfare.
Oh, yeah.
Devastating impact of logistical failures and the brutal indifference of Mother Nature. She doesn't care. And it's human drama woven with politics, unnecessary deaths, and consequences that shape the future of two nations.
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe I should call my mom Mother Nature.
Hey, this is a history podcast, not a therapy podcast.
Yes, join us for that next
This is
week.
not called therapy ration, okay? This is called rum ration. Drink your sorrows away. Push the feelings down, Rejoy. We've talked about this. I'm a licensed professional.
Tamp it down. So let's get the backstory of this particular campaign. So to understand why the Americans even looked north, as they seem to be continuously doing nowadays, we need to set the scene. So before the Revolution, Quebec was a relatively new British acquisition, right? Gained after the 7 Years' War, where the French were soundly thrashed, or as the Americans call it, the French and Indian War. And Quebec was largely French-speaking, of course, and Catholic, very Catholic. And so very different from the predominantly Protestant 13 colonies to the south. And Quebec had only been a British possession for about, 15 years at this point, because the 7 Years' War ended in 1763, right? So
That's right.
Yeah. So not very long.
No, and you just raised a good point that made me think that not only were the 13 colonies, or the northern 13 colonies, I should say, the American continental ones, not only they, as you say, Protestant, they were like the extreme kind of Protestants. They weren't garden variety Anglicans.
No. There's a reason why they were asked to leave England.
There's a reason why they were there. Yeah, these guys were like all in on like hating Catholics. Probably not big fans of the French either after Quebec. So, how they thought they could woo over French-speaking Catholics. Who do they think they were? Sam Hughes?
Yeah, as it turns out, they weren't even big fans of the English.
No, not so much, no. Oh. And the British, who had been trying to integrate this new territory that they had taken off of our good friends under General Montcalm and others, they passed the Quebec Act in 1774. And this act was designed to secure the allegiance of French Canadians by making Catholicism and French civil law legal, which was pretty new in the history of conquest. Usually you take over a place and say, all right, bitches, it's my rules now, right? And even they even reinstated the seigneurial system, which is a peculiar method of land distribution and farming that was set up in Nouvelle-France. And this guaranteed French Canadians seigneurs their property rights, although I think most of the seigneurs already fucked off back to France. They abandoned the Canadiens to themselves. But, it sounded kind of reasonable, right?
Absolutely, but not to the American colonists. Reasonable was not in their vocabulary, as that you wouldn't look at them and say these are very reasonable people,
which is strange given the political rhetoric that comes out of Washington today.
I know,
seems very reasonable.
Very reasonable, very, grounded in reality. So these guys were angered by the Quebec Act. They feared the encroachment of Catholicism and felt cheated out of the Ohio Valley, a prime fur trading and agricultural territory that the act added to Quebec's boundaries. That's another grievance seems to be, they had grievances in England, so they left. They have grievances in the New World, and, it's a grievance seems to be a big thing. So this really ratcheted up tensions between the colonies and the British Crown.
Yeah, and despite generations of animosity, the First Continental Congress saw an opportunity. They started sending out appeals, famously titled, quote, "Letters to the Inhabitants of the Province of Quebec." Pretty direct. And they were trying to persuade Canadians to join their cause. They praised French thinkers and made vague statements about religious liberty, warning that the Quebec Act eliminated rights like habeas corpus and trial by jury and could easily lead to new taxes without consent.
Aha!
We know they didn't like
Taxes.
They got a little touchy about taxes, didn't they? Yeah,
We know about that.
We have to pay for our own protection? What the fuck? And of course, before you start rolling your eyes, the Americans were
Too
at
late.
least clever enough back then to publish the letter in French. Over 2,000 copies, that's a lot of copies, of the first address from the Congress were made, and it was soon translated into, quote, very tolerable French, end quote, with the translation attributed to Pierre Eugène du Cimetière.
Very interesting. They even asked, quote, what is offered to you by the late Act of Parliament in their place? Liberty of conscience in your religion? No, God gave it to you, unquote. Okay. And they explicitly stated that any rights granted by the Act were temporary, liable to be, quote, varied or altered by any ordinances of the Governor and Council, unquote. They invited Canadians to send delegates to the Second Continental Congress. But knowing them, they probably weren't going to pay for the travel costs or meals. You're on your own.
Any chance that these rights were temporary and liable to be varied or altered by any ordinances of, or say, an invasion of a hostile force from the south? Maybe these habitants could see through that shit, eh? The Canadians were, or as we like to know them, the Canadiens or the habitants, were largely ambivalent, despite claims to the contrary. And as one British administrator, William Hay, observed, the Canadians' mind had been, quote, poisoned by the emissaries from New England, end quote. And Bishop Jean-François Hubert of Quebec even recalled, quote, the progress among the Canadians of the spirit of liberty and independence brought about this by the circulation of manifestos by the Anglo-Americans.
Indeed. But those pamphlets were great for, the fireplace and things. So kept them warm in the winter.
Yes. And I heard they were absorbent, too, so they could be used for other
That's a whole other podcast. However, the reality on the ground was that many Canadians chose rather to stand neutral, while some French habitants might have been opportunistically happy to follow whichever force was winning, especially if they paid for their supplies.
Yeah, I mean, if someone wants to buy my poutine, who am I to say
yes. No? Who's gonna? Yeah. By the way, it's no
Those
longer
stripper poles don't pay for themselves, man. Chez Paris had to make rent.
How do you think the Saint Hubert chicken chain was founded?
That's right.
So, and we're saying, especially if they paid for their supplies, appeals to English liberties didn't resonate broadly.
Weird that.
Yeah, what a surprise. As always, the Americans read that correctly, didn't they? So, yeah, liberties, yes. Ultimately, Congress only managed to raise 2 Canadian regiments, totaling not more than 1,000 men. So this early lack of widespread support was a significant red flag that was too readily dismissed. And this would start a tradition of red flags which were too readily dismissed by our friends down south.
What is it that Winston Churchill said about the Americans in World War II? The Americans will always do the right thing after they've exhausted every other opportunity. Or every other option.
Classic.
Oh, God bless me. All right, the real shift here came after the battles of Lexington and Concord in April 1775, which got the revolutionaries feeling a little feisty, and it officially ignited the American Revolution. And the American militias quickly laid siege to Boston, pinning British troops there.
And that's where they talk about the very famous Minutemen, where I think American history tells you it only took them a minute to head out. But I think it's based on the first one when his wife told him, "Hey, the Brits are coming." Probably said, "Oh, wait a minute, give me a minute." Still in the bathroom.
Give me one more of those Quebec proclamations.
That's right. And I bought some poutine. They haven't delivered it yet. So almost immediately, attention turned north. Of course, Benedict Arnold and Ethan Allen, he of the Vermont Furniture Company chain fame, with their...
Don't think he formed the...
What I remember, the commercials, Ethan Allen, sale this week, dressers half price. So Benedict Arnold and Ethan Allen with their Green Mountain Boys captured Fort Ticonderoga on Lake Champlain in May 1775. Now, this was a huge strategic win, all jokes aside, not just for the much-needed artillery for the Boston siege, but also because it blocked a potential British invasion route south.
Yeah, that's right. And Congress was initially hesitant to invade Canada. I guess some of them had seen some of those red flags you were mentioning. And they were even ordering that, quote, no expedition or incursion ought to be undertaken or made by any colony or body of colonists against or into Canada, end quote. That's pretty clear.
That's pretty clear.
That's pretty clear.
Yeah.
They didn't
Yeah.
want to be seen as the aggressors.
And they probably also knew that it's pretty damn cold up here in the winter. So
It gets cold.
it gets cold. But then intelligence started rolling in that Governor Guy Carleton was fortifying Fort St. John's and trying to bring the Iroquois Confederacy onto the British side. And everyone is terrified of the Iroquois.
Yeah, I wouldn't fuck with them.
No, I would definitely not. So this changed Congress's tune. And by late June 1775, they authorized Major General Philip Schuyler to plan an invasion of Quebec, but only if it would not be disagreeable to the Canadians. So again, like if you fuck it up, you were obviously disagreeable to the Canadians. If you succeeded, we'll take credit for telling you to do it. And the Canadians love you. So now, speaking of changing sides, it is time for our fantasy sponsor, Benedict Arnold Brandy.
Distilled with bold revolutionary fire and just a hint of betrayal, Benedict Arnold Brandy goes down smooth right until it suddenly switches sides and leaves you with a bitter aftertaste.
Whether you're storming the walls of Quebec, arguing with General Montgomery, or just contemplating selling out your comrades for a comfy post in the British Army, this brandy has your back. Until it doesn't.
One sip and you'll be shouting, Vive la Révolution! The next you'll be toasting His Majesty's health.
So raise a glass of Benedict Arnold Brandy, the official drink of bad decisions, frozen rivers, and complicated legacies, available wherever questionable loyalties are sold.
Okay, man, that's one of your better ones. That's pretty damn good. Kudos.
It was a lot of fun.
All right. This is the birth of the two-pronged invasion plan. One force under Schuyler and the other, and later, of course, Major General Richard Montgomery, would take the traditional Lake Champlain-Richelieu River route. The other one, famously led by Colonel Benedict Arnold, would take, quote, an arduous and unusual route, end quote, through the Maine wilderness along the Kennebec and Chaudière rivers, intending to surprise Quebec City. Yeah, they'd be surprised, like, who the heck is coming up there? Washington himself, impressed by Arnold's aggressive nature and knowledge of the area, approved this daring second thrust. So General Washington said, good idea. Up you go there into the...
Yeah, I think that's exactly he probably said, see you later. And Benedict Arnold, of course, has gone down in history, many things. I was just kind of wondering if he invented Eggs Benedict, considering that he didn't have any on the way up there, as we will find out.
He did not have a lot of food.
So here's the grim reality, and this is where the human drama and the sheer logistical nightmare truly begins to unfold.
Yeah.
Especially for Arnold's column.
Yeah.
Now, remember those eggs. His march through Maine was described by a British resident of Quebec as almost a miracle.
Not far wrong. A miracle indeed, in the sense that anyone survived. Arnold had predicted a 180-mile trek to Quebec in 20 days. That's pretty aggressive. And the reality was a grueling 350-mile journey, so only, double. That took 45 days, more than double. His maps, based on a 1761 survey, were, quote, dangerously flawed, end quote, and underestimated the distance significantly.
Yes, and I suspect his map reading skills are on a par with mine, so...
You'd still be out there.
I would still be. I've been known to do that. So the supplies and equipment were a disaster from the start. The bateaux, intended for river travel, were very badly built and smaller than the directions given. So, Colin, a little known thing. Lowest bidder. Well, here we have the first example of, people think IKEA was founded in the last century, but actually there was an attempt very early on.
No, I'm pretty sure if it was made by IKEA, those things would have been watertight and perfect. They would have been actually well done.
Yeah, but it was how you put it together.
Right, fair enough.
One officer called them little better than common rafts. They frequently leaked, ruining gunpowder and spoiling vital food supplies. A soldier recalled that the bread casks, not being waterproof, admitted the water in plenty, swelled the bread, burst the casks, as well as soured the whole bread, unquote. Most of the salted beef was also bad.
It sounds like they're whining a little bit, really.
Yeah,
At least the boats were consistent. If they frequently leaked, I mean, you knew they were going to leak, so,
yeah.
Get on it.
And why keep the bread in those casks then? Like you see that,
Well, the good news is not only were they going to get wet from the water leaking in, there also became the environmental onslaught when the water came from out. Soldiers were soaked by torrential downpours of rain, half blinded by raging snowstorms, and frozen by plummeting temperatures. Woohoo! Put that on your tourism brochure. Come up through Maine and visit Quebec. They were constantly wet and cold. Freezing rain made the ground muddy and slippery, increasing the risk of infection and eventual gangrene if their feet stayed wet too long. Oh, that sounds like a lot of fun.
No, I have to agree with you. I think they're just whining now. You know,
Malingering, eh? Pulling a
I
full
said the
Rejoy.
same sort of stuff also, and that
Yeah,
was,
yeah, yeah, for
that.
sure.
But,
You just got the better.
well, there you are. So the terrain was brutal. That's no joke. That's
No,
actually
no, no,
very,
no.
very true. James Melvin, a private on the expedition, noted they, quote, marched through hideous woods and mountains for the most part. So obviously not a fan of nature, but sometimes on the banks of the river, which is very rapid, unquote. Really, very rapid.
Yeah, well, we're done.
Okay. The journey involved grueling portages where men had to physically carry heavy bateaux over boggy ground and through muck, often wading chest deep in frigid waters. Of course, First Nations guys used to do this often.
They weren't
They,
stupid enough to be doing this in October up to their
but they wouldn't
chest
do
in
it in
November.
October,
No,
yes. But
no.
portaging and Canadian used to do it too. But
Mhm.
see, it is a lot of whining. Soldiers' shoulders were rubbed raw from carrying the boat. Their legs sunk deep into the muck. The Dead River, despite its name, rose dramatically due to floodwaters, causing 6 bateaux to swamp and sink, destroying precious provisions. Have you noticed throughout history how many times these these sort of geographical points labeled as the Dead River or the lack of water sea, all of a sudden, when you decide you're going to launch a military operation, decide, oh, I'm going to flood now.
Yeah, it's good for morale too. Hey, troops, don't worry. We're going up the Dead River. Oh, why is it called that, sir? Well, once we get over Fast and Furious, we'll crush you into Death Rapids. Then we go through the paddle up the Dead River. Great.
Yes, you'll float through it.
Yeah, well, we're being a little flippant here, but it is very grim conditions for
It
these
was,
American
yes.
Revolutionary soldiers, and starvation became a grim reality. By mid-October, provisions had run out, forcing the men to desperate measures. Some accounts describe soldiers eating dogs, candles, and shoes.
Oh.
Captain Henry Dearborn vividly documented one instance. They ate every part of my dog, not excepting his entrails, and after finishing their meal, they collected the bones and carried them to be pounded up and to make broth for another meal.
I
Wow,
can
didn't
imagine
waste
it.
anything there.
Terrible.
End quote. And dysentery and diarrhea also became widespread. Dysentery is, of course, where you shit yourself to death, really. Shit blood. That's lovely.
Shit blood.
And soldiers were actually reduced to boiling their boots to soften the leather sufficiently so they could eat them as the only source of sustenance, which, of course, left them with no boots in the winter in a
Again,
swamp in Maine.
thought that through very well.
Awesome. Things are going well. Things are going well.
So, well, by the time they reached Quebec, Arnold's men were, quote, ragged and reduced in numbers. No kidding. Resembling emaciated scarecrows. Many were shoeless. Well, they ate their damn shoes.
Go on, man.
Resorting to crude moccasins made of raw beef hides or raw skins. Abner Stocking, ironically named, wrote of their appearance, quote, their clothes were torn in pieces by the bushes and hung in strings. Few of us had, any shoes, but moccasins made of raw skins, many of us without hats, and beards long and visages thin and meager. I thought we much resembled the animals which inhabit New Spain, called the orang-outang. They had little or no powder and lacked artillery as well.
And quite surprisingly, these conditions severely impacted troop morale, because you couldn't predict that. Many were sick, starving, and exhausted. Henry Dearborn reflected the despair, in quote, we were small indeed to think of entering a place like Quebec, but being now almost out of provisions, we were sure to die if we attempted to return back, and we could be in no worse situation if we proceeded on our route, end quote. So damned if you do, damned if you don't. Some soldiers, though, even started talking about an open rebellion. Lieutenant Colonel Enos, with 300 men, chose to say, fuck this, and turn back.
Not surprising. Meanwhile, Montgomery's force was facing its own challenges. Their advance was delayed by a 45-day siege of Fort St. John's in the fall of 1775. This lengthy siege proved a strategic success for the British, whose objective was to slow down the American invasion. It pushed the campaign deeper into winter than intended, proving fatal to the American effort in capturing Quebec by exhausting supplies and severely impacting morale.
Yeah, and after taking Montreal with little difficulty because Carleton had abandoned it as indefensible, Montgomery's army was much reduced in size by expiring enlistments, because that's right, these were colonial militias. As troops were only signed up for a duration, and afterwards they could bugger off.
They could leave, yeah.
He had started with 1,200 men, but he was down to only 500 when he left Montreal, taking just 300 with him to Quebec City, which I guess, given that the Brits had already abandoned Montreal and then they had a whole bunch of the American troops leave because their
Term is up.
term was up, that
yep.
probably meant that the lineup outside of Chez Paré was probably greatly reduced. So, at least they had that, right?
Yeah, you don't wait so long.
You don't have to wait so long.
Yeah,
Still got to tip the doorman.
But tip, the colonist tip, the tip they'll give him is, talk to God. That's my tip to you. And it's also one of the colonists' traditions they started there. When the term's up, the term's up, and you'd see that in their Civil War as well. When they enthusiastically signed up in 1861 for the duration of 6 months, and 6 months were up on the eve of battle. Oh, my 6 months are up. See you later. And now, that's right. That's right. And then the weather intervened again. Arnold's crossing of the St. Lawrence days in November by squalls.
Why didn't you just take the Champlain Bridge?
Yeah, a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
This delay gave the British time to reinforce Quebec City before Arnold's meager, exhausted force could attack. When Montgomery and Arnold finally linked up in early December, their combined strength was only about 1,200 men, facing a British garrison of roughly 1,800. They were in no condition for a quick victory.
No, and with the clock ticking on expiring enlistments that you were talking about, many soldiers planned to leave by New Year's Day.
Yes.
Yay! Montgomery decided on an all-out assault on Quebec City on December 31st. 1775. That's
going to suck when your term is expiring the next day.
I'm sure you'll have very motivated troops doing their utmost to put themselves at extreme risk.
But sir, I've packed.
I'm out of here, buddy.
Sold my rifle.
I've already eaten my boots. Now, disregarding the need for a 3-to-1 advantage for assaulting, they instead waited for a blizzard, hoping the cover of snowfall would allow them to scale the walls undetected. So when, I guess, you have no other real strategy or any real tactics, you just say, heck, let's just try anything.
You fall back on hope.
Wait for the snow. Okay. Remember, folks, if you ever take it from us, two former infantry officers, if you're ever planning to invade a neighbor, take it from us who learned it firsthand from the kind, gentle souls who staffed the infantry school in Gagetown. You always want a minimum of a 3-to-1 advantage when attacking. 5-to-1 is better. 7-to-1 is preferred. Heck, the technical term, I believe, is called the more the merrier. So the Americans here had fewer troops than the defenders and thought that would be, I guess they had no choice. So they went ahead for them. I'll give them points for courage. You can't say these guys were soft and you can't say they didn't have a ton of courage.
No, that's absolutely true. But they also had one other thing that our instructors at Gagetown never really talked about. They had hope, Colin. They had hope.
Hope was usually crushed.
Hope that it's going to snow and hope that the snow will cover our assault.
Well, then again, hoping for snow in Quebec end of December, chances are pretty good.
Not irrational. Right? But you know what? Things were just not going their way.
No.
Because here, the element of surprise was lost. Thanks to information supplied by deserters, the defenders were ready. So, unlike the colonists, the British professionals, they saw red flags and they acted on them. So, the attack quickly devolved into a complete rout. Montgomery's division was ambushed, and he was killed by a British cannon blast. Arnold, leading his own column, was seriously wounded in the leg, forcing Daniel Morgan to take command. His last shouted words as he was carried back were, "Don't give up. Go on, boys. Go on, boys." I'm pretty sure Benedict Arnold has some Flashman blood in him.
We're going to talk about that a little bit later. He's when I was researching for this, he's fascinating. He is fascinating. He was a great soldier. And that attack that he had done earlier on Oak Island, I think it was impressive.
Yes, he was a very talented soldier, actually.
Yeah. And sailor. But it was futile. Morgan's men, after fighting house to house, found themselves caught as if it were in a trap, and they were forced to surrender. The Americans suffered devastating losses, 60 to 100 killed and wounded, and about 400 captured. British casualties, in stark contrast, were minor, around 20 men.
Jesus,
that's a pretty good ratio.
And talking about Arnold, despite this crushing defeat, he was now promoted to brigadier general, he maintained a half-hearted siege of Quebec City for several more months. But the American army was ravaged by smallpox.
Yeah.
I mean, add that to everything else.
Yeah, exactly.
Now you got smallpox.
Yeah.
Which incapacitated a large portion of the soldiers and caused more casualties than combat itself.
Wow.
Which was very common in the 18th, 19th centuries. Smallpox was a real danger, as the number one killer during the siege was a disease rather than attacks. Also, again, very common in those days. Almost a quarter of the besieging army was unfit for duty. John Joseph Henry, an American veteran, recalled that soldiers even inoculated themselves against smallpox by means of pins or needles. But this practice was often prohibited by military officials because it was, quote, reducing the invasion force's combat efficiency. So I'm sure there was a Kennedy floating around there
I
someplace.
was going to make a Kennedy joke myself. You beat me to it. Beat me to it.
How can you not? It is worth noting that the sources do not provide details on specific inoculation policies implemented or prohibited by Benedict Arnold or Seth Warner during this campaign,
Or Secretary of Health Kennedy.
nor any comparative outcomes on their respective forces regarding smallpox.
Yeah. And the initial Canadian ambivalence that we'd talked about with the Quebec population morphed into outright hostility. The Americans had alienated the local population by commandeering supplies and insisting on the use of paper currency. Yeah, we're paying for it. Here you go.
What is this crap?
Yeah, what is this crap that I can't use anywhere? And General David Wooster's idiotic crusade in American-occupied Montreal, where he jailed suspected loyalists and even closed mass houses, which are known as churches. But notice he went out of the way to call them a mass house as opposed to a church. And
Yes.
I hope he didn't shut down the strip joints, because that would just kill it. No poutine, no strip joints. What the hell? He further inflamed sentiment. Moses Hazen, an American officer, observed that the Canadian peasantry in Montreal were, quote, waiting an opportunity to join our enemies, end quote. Even a delegation from Congress, including Benjamin Franklin, who you and I visited his grave,
We did.
found the population, quote, largely disposed against the Americans, end quote.
I wonder if that came as a surprise.
Yeah, no shit.
The writing was on the wall. As spring arrived in 1776, the ice on the St. Lawrence River melted, allowing British reinforcements to sail upriver, and a fleet carrying 10,000 fresh British troops and Hessian auxiliaries arrived, effectively ending the American siege.
A siege, which was like 600 dudes at this point, like max, ravaged by smallpox, walking around with no shoes on, like in the spring. Yeah.
Siege.
Siege. Meaning the Brits were just nice and cozy in the warm Quebec citadel, going, throw another log on the fire, but hate to be outside. It's cold out there.
Pass me another bowl of poutine.
Exactly.
What was
The
that
Americans
face pressed up
obviously
against the window?
That's right. Americans had no choice but to retreat hastily, often leaving behind valuable military equipment like half-boiled boots, including cannon and gunpowder in their desperate scramble. What, they left both cannons? The remnants of the American army under Generals John Sullivan and Benedict Arnold began their long withdrawal towards Fort Ticonderoga. And Isaac Center, a doctor on that campaign, described the retreat as, quote, heterogeneal concatenation of the most peculiar and unparalleled rebuffs and sufferings that are perhaps to be found in the annals of any nation. Wow, that's some big words there.
Beautiful.
He must have been a Scrabble champion. By July 1776, the Americans had been completely driven out of Canada.
It's a shame that we don't write like that anymore. But I think this is the perfect spot to pause again for our ever-popular Wish We Had a Sponsor segment.
That's right, and today's sponsor is also from the fine line of Arnold Refreshments. This time it's Arnold's Expedition Strength Rum. It survived the swamps of Maine, the snows of Quebec, and the collective groans of every militiaman who's signed up for a quick little jaunt.
Each barrel is triple-aged in canoes that barely survived the Kennebec River. It's the only rum guaranteed to taste like damp powder, desperation, and a faint hope Congress will reimburse you.
Faint hope indeed. Arnold's Expedition Strength Rum. March north, drink south, get smallpox. History will probably forget this anyway.
Until we dig it up for your education. So now what happened afterwards? So the American invasion of Quebec was the first major defeat suffered by the Americans in the Revolutionary War. It ended all hope of Quebec joining the American cause as the, quote, 14th colony, unquote. Canada was firmly affixed squarely in the arms of the British.
That's right. And for the Continental Congress, the disaster led to some important, albeit painful, lessons. They never again delegated such consequential political decisions to military leaders, retaining tighter civilian control over crucial military strategy. Yeah, good call. However, the campaign as a whole was characterized by, quote, fuzzy thinking and lack of foresight, end quote. Congress later blamed the defeat on enlistment difficulties, a general lack of funds, and a widespread pox, which were politically palatable reasons that obscured deeper strategic failures and ideological missteps. So it wasn't really our fault. It's just we didn't give them enough money. Oh, wait, I guess that's our fault. We're supposed to give them the money. Smallpox. Smallpox. John Adams himself cited a diversity of sentiments in Congress, intelligence failures, and poor planning. Yeah. It wasn't just smallpox.
And again, the establishment of traditions
Yes.
that have been carried on proudly down through the ages. But what about the Canadian perspective? Ironically, the American invasion backfired as a persuasive tactic, forced French Canadians, British soldiers, and other loyalists to fight alongside one another. That must have been a happy crew, actually. This experience, as one curator suggests, became, quote, one of these early stages of what becomes modern Canadian identity, unquote. Thousands of loyalists fleeing the newly independent United States after 1783 would further solidify Canada's British ties. And really, despite all the arguments back and forth and, the rubbing of raw edges, you can see the Canadian identity beginning to be forged there. And
Absolutely.
everyone
Including the
working
use of
together.
the word Canada.
That's right. Yes.
The invasion of Quebec stands as a stark cautionary tale for American expansionism. Despite this resounding failure, the underlying assumption that Canada was ripe for the taking persisted and perhaps continues to persist in American thought. This misguided confidence would remarkably lead to similar disastrous attempts, such as the War of 1812, where American troops once again marched into Canada, only to face what a historian described as pretty much a disaster from beginning to the end. And we also have a special episode on, War Plan Orange, wasn't it? The invasion.
Yes, we did.
War Plan Red.
Red.
Orange was the defense of the Philippines, but Red was the invasion of Canada that the Americans had up in the 30s and 40s.
That's
We
right.
had our own too. We were ready to take them.
That's right.
That episode was called Maple Mayhem, I think, if you're looking it up.
That's right, Maple Mayhem. And we do encourage you to go back and have a listen because it's a fascinating story.
It is, yeah.
And many people, don't really know very much about it. I know I certainly didn't until you dug it up, and it was incredible. Yeah, and then of course it was during the War of 1812 where the marched down and actually burnt the White House. So it became the White House. But the troops had a good meal because apparently President Madison left in a bit of a hurry. Intelligence came in that, there are troops up the road and they're wearing red coats, not blue.
Not blue.
So maybe let's get a meal down the road. So they got a good dinner that night.
They could have gone a Cracker Barrel with a new logo.
Yes. Well, it seems that the American liberators sought to bring their own concepts of freedom to a foreign culture, to a people with a starkly contrasting worldview, and to a society inextricably welded to a seemingly antagonistic religion and lacking a tradition of popular rule. This deeply flawed understanding of Canadian society and the relentless environment proved too much for the raw, unorganized American forces, regardless of their bravery and determination, because there was a lot of that there.
We said it a couple of times, and I know we come across this sometimes flipping, and we're just having some fun with our American friends, but the courage and the bravery, what these men had to endure, is beyond anything that any reasonable human being could ever be expected to do. So kudos and hats off. Hats are beautiful Rum Ration podcast hats. All I got to say. Thank you very much, Rejoy.
Yes.
Thank you. Hats off to the brave Americans. So there you have it. The story of the Quebec invasion, a perfect storm of logistical failures, from leaky boats to spoiled food to non-existent maps and underestimations of distance.
Combined with the brutal, unforgiving winter environment, the ravages of smallpox, and a fundamental misunderstanding of the local population, it's clear why this bold venture ended in such a resounding defeat for the American revolutionaries.
Indeed, a costly lesson, one that still echoes in the relationship between these two North American nations today.
That's right. And, well, that's all for this episode of Rum Ration. We hope you've enjoyed the deep dive into a lesser-known but profoundly impactful moment in history. If you want to hear more about Benedict Arnold, let us know in the comments or send us an email at info@rumration.com.
That's right. He was a fascinating character who was considered one of the top American generals at the time. I was just so impressed with him as I researched for this episode that I'd be happy to put together an episode just on him. So let us know in the comments, please. Join us next time as we delve into another forgotten chapter of human conflict. Until then, keep those rations dry and your powder even drier. Cheers to history.
Cheers to history.